Okay, welcome to the podcast. This is episode 1 of the Adjacent Pod. If you missed our introduction, my name is Kubs Lalchandani. I am an attorney, and recently we've been getting into a lot of areas of crypto law. And what we're finding is there's a lot of different areas that impact the crypto world, from politics to finances and other things. And so that kind of brought about the idea of creating a podcast called Adjacent. What's happening adjacent to crypto, and what is the impact on crypto? So with that, I kind of want to get going. This is episode 1. We have an incredible guest today, which I'm going to introduce in a second here. He is the reason that I got into the world of crypto. I call him kind of a crypto genius, and we're going to hear a lot about him and how he got to where he is. But first, let's start with a little couple statistics about the world of crypto. Right now, as of the end of 2024, 562 million people globally own cryptocurrency. That is 6.8% of the world's population. And here's the kicker: that is up 33% from the year before. In 2023, the Federal Reserve estimated that 7% of American adults owned or used cryptocurrency. In 2025, they're estimating that 7% will rise to 28%, or about 65 million people in the country. That clearly indicates where the world of crypto is going and why we are trying to talk about it. As a market update, if you're following Bitcoin, which the whole world seems to follow, it's trending back towards $100,000 today. And it's kind of, it hit this nice little rhythm above 100, dropped below, and then has gone back up. And I think if you talk to the crypto believers like our guest today, you're going to find that the belief is that it's going to go much higher. And we're going to talk a lot about that over the course of the podcast. In the news, because we're lawyers, we try to talk about what's happening in the news. I think the big news today is that the SEC dropped its case against Coinbase. They were alleging that they were selling unregistered securities on an unregistered exchange. I think with the introduction of the new administration, things are changing wildly. That settlement is still subject to approval, but we believe it's going that way. I saw my friend Paul Gruel is the one of the lawyers over at Coinbase, jumping wildly and ecstatically on LinkedIn this morning. So I think it's going well. And then the other topic I wanted to broach really quickly was Web3 games. In the last 3 months, I've gotten calls. We've seen a lot of news. I've been in presentations. I've been in VC meetings raising money for Web3 games. And I saw a news article that came out today. Catizen put out some news that over the last 10 months since its inception, it has earned about $34 million in revenue from 1 or 2 games. I think that demonstrates the explosive possibilities of Web3 games, which we will have a full episode dedicated just to that. And with that, I want to get to my first guest. This one's kind of special for me. I wouldn't be doing what I do if it wasn't for him. His name is Justin Wales. He's the head of legal for the Americas at crypto.com and author of the Crypto Legal Handbook. Everything I do now, I use that as a resource to tell me what I need to think about, how to frame things, and where I need to go. The opening story before I bring him on is I wanted to kind of give you an idea of who Justin Wales is. Way back in 2014, I was leading this organization in Miami, and that organization brings on about 20 fellows each year. Okay. And it's wildly hard to get in. About 100 people apply for 20 seats. And Justin applied, and he wrote a great application, and he got his interview. During his interview, and just at this point, Justin and I had never met. During his interview, and his interview was with 5 esteemed people in Miami, heads of big corporation, the mayor was there, heads of the Knight Foundation were there, and somebody comes into my office. I was not in his interview. Somebody comes into the office and says, "Did you hear what this candidate just said?" And I said, "No. Who is the candidate?" They said, "This guy named Justin Wales just told the entire group of esteemed people that were interviewing him that he was there to interview them to determine whether this organization was worth his time." And I literally told my friend who came in to tell me that, accept him, get him in. And, fast forward some 11, 12 years, we're still doing it together. So I wanted to take a time to welcome Justin Wales. Justin, welcome to the pod.
Hey, thank you. You know what's so funny is that it was, the fellowship was like sort of really interesting and it required me to basically spend my, several weekends for a couple months in something that I affectionately would call leadership jail. So was it worth my time? It made me wake up really early in the morning for several weekends in a row. But I think all in all, it allowed me to meet a lot of really good people.
Well, it's good. I mean, I think we are sitting in this room right now because you decided to grant us your time when you were what you were how old back then?
I don't know, 24.
24. You gave us your time and now it turned into this relationship. So we're all very grateful. Justin, I want to kind of jump out of the gate with the first question and say, I'm going to talk a lot today about how brilliant you are and how you are one of the cutting edge crypto minds in the country. But what I really want to do is hear about how you got to this position of where you are now and, kind of walk us through your career and how it led to this moment.
Yeah, when I was in law school, I was kind of singularly focused on the First Amendment, and um, I was really wanted to just do constitutional law and do First Amendment law. And if you were sort of a First Amendment head in the during the Obama administration, you were paying a lot of attention to what was happening with WikiLeaks. And there was like these embargoes that the U.S. government was essentially placing on donations to WikiLeaks by putting a lot of pressure on payments institutions, PayPal, MasterCard, Visa, basically saying that we don't want you to process any donations to this organization. So around that time, there was a lot of talk by Julian Assange and also people within like the First Amendment space about like, what are the implications of this pressure? And WikiLeaks and Julian Assange basically started posting online that, if you want to um, donate to us and support us, donate using Bitcoin. And I didn't know what Bitcoin was, and I had never even thought of the idea of like censorship resistant or like electronic money. But that sort of like triggered something in my brain, and I started looking more into it. I started going to eventually like meetups in Miami and meeting folks who were in the space. And eventually, I got a job as just, a constitutional lawyer doing First Amendment and other sorts of constitutional cases. And at the same time, I just had friends who were starting companies and they were thinking about this stuff, or, I would kind of be introduced to. And, when you're the only lawyer someone knows, you're the lawyer they call. So over, a long period of time in my early career, I would start to like quarterback cases or start to like introduce folks at my firm who were subject matter experts in like financial regulations or payments law or whatever to these crypto people, and I would kind of translate between them. And over several years, I sort of was in enough meetings that I started not having to go and introduce them to these senior partners because I kind of knew the answers. And then over enough time, the practice started to become more focused on the crypto and the financial regulations and less focused on the constitutional work. And yeah, that's basically how I got into the career. And then there were a couple jumps of firms before I ended up at crypto.com.
Well, let me ask you something. I remember the first time you were walking me through my first transaction, either buying Bitcoin or doing something. And I will tell you one of the things that I felt, and one of the things I really want to talk about on the podcast is how to make crypto more accessible to your everyday person. And I remember I was going through it and I felt like there was just this lack of trust. Am I really going to give a couple $1,000 and they're going to give me this electronic thing that I store in an app? And do I trust it? I felt like I was getting scammed. I felt like Justin, my friend for so long, was taking my money. And this was all just a big, kind of scheme. And it took me a while before I realized that this is not different than banking. How did you overcome from your inception to getting really comfortable, not just trading through the exchanges, but, offloading your crypto into your own wallet and doing all those things and feeling confident that was a secure thing to do?
I mean, I think I'm benefited because I started paying attention before the idea that this would become like a global market really took place. And it was really a payments transactional network. That's how I thought of it. It was just a tool in which you can transmit value without anyone standing in the middle and saying the person you're sending this to is not worthy of participating in like an economy. So I didn't have like the moment of do I take, you know, 6 or 7 figures in US dollars and transfer it to Bitcoin and then move it. Is like I was completely broke when I first like learned about all this. So like the amount of money that I was transacting in at the time was, something that I could afford as like a broke law student.
Do
So
you do
yeah.
you think like your mom or an elderly person that they could grasp this and start trading in Bitcoin or at least buy some relatively easy nowadays?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's as easy as buying any sort of like equity or managing your 401k. I mean, it's gotten like really easy if you're just trying to say like I'm buying an asset or one way or the other. If you're trying to do like interesting like swaps on like like DeFi sort of activity, like that probably takes like another several lessons. But just the idea of purchasing it, it's as easy as any sort of online banking.
Well, that's amazing. So you were a First Amendment lawyer, and then you moved into crypto after you kind of dealt with this issue with Assange and WikiLeaks. Take us a little bit through for the young lawyers out there. Take us through your career because I will tell you your exponential rise out of the University of Miami is probably one of the stories I tell most people about.
Yeah, I got very lucky. I mean, I've gotten lucky a lot, but one of them is that I was like very interested in the First Amendment, and I got a job after law school doing First Amendment work. But I also discovered like this entire world through like the lens of free speech and free expression and like tools that allow for people to interact freely with one another. So there was actually like kind of like a natural like transition between the constitutional practice and the crypto practice that a lot of people don't realize. But like I wrote an article in 2018 or 2019 called Bitcoin is Speech, and it's all the First Amendment like free speech aspects of having these networks, right? And really, it's just networks allow us to connect to each other in different ways. Um, so yeah, so the transition happened like really naturally. And the other thing that I had like that was really lucky is I had a really amazing mentor, a guy named Rick Opelman,
I've
who
met him. I met
as
him.
yeah, yeah. So as soon as I told him about like Bitcoin, kind of explained to him, he like got it. Like he just completely understood like the technical parts of it, and he completely understood like the more philosophical parts and expressive parts of it. And he basically told me like, I think you have something here. I think this is really interesting. There's no lawyers doing this kind of work. Um, but you should pursue this. And he was senior enough at the firm to say like, don't worry about your hours. Don't worry about anything other than like trying to build your career up and go and try to, get some business in this space. So he supported me. And like you'd see, like my first year's hours at the firm was like, 2,100 or 2,200 hours or something like that. And by like the third year, I was at like 1,400 hours, just like kind of building this practice. And he, like to his credit, like supported me and let me do my own thing. And the firm I was at, was very supportive and gave me a practice group. And I just, it's like timing is everything, man. Like from like my pedigree and sort of my attitude, if I was trying to break in right now, it would be so hard because there's so many people who are doing it. But I just got in at like just the absolute perfect time where someone who was like had a bit of an entrepreneurial or like a rebellious streak at a law firm could really grow this. And then the money just started coming in from like clients that the firm was just like, well, what are we going to tell him? No, like he's like the only associate bringing in business.
That is amazing. Do you want to tell the audience how much you've made buying crypto?
No.
I'm just kidding. I was not going to put you on the spot for that one. All right. So we know that you were an associate at a great firm in Florida. We know that you started their crypto practice. Just give me a little bit about how you made the jump from that private practice life into your current role.
Yeah, so the mentor I had, um, was great. Like he was helping me out. It was so nice to like work with him. And but the firm that I was at was like a very domestic law firm, right? We had offices in the US, but we were sending out a lot of work overseas. So it was always like I always understood like, okay, it's probably best for me. It would be better for me to be at a firm with an international practice. Um, my mentor, he passed away in 20 January of 2020.
Yeah, I
So
remember that.
once that happened, like there was nothing really tying me to that firm anymore, and like we just had so many offers at other places. So pretty quickly after he passed, I started like looking around like where's the next shop. Um, I eventually settled on a large international firm called K&L Gates. So I went in as a partner there, and K&L Gates was already representing in a somewhat limited capacity crypto.com. And I met them, 2 weeks after I started at the firm. And within, I don't know, 2 or 3 months from meeting them, they said, "Hey, why don't you come in and lead this legal team?" So it was just like as soon as we met, it, it was just like a natural like transition. And basically, my ending time at K&L Gates was basically entirely doing crypto.com work for the most part. I was just like acting in this role externally, and then I ended up coming in in house at the end of the year.
You're talking generally about crypto law, and I think for the law students, the lawyers who don't practice in this area, for generally people who are not knowledgeable about crypto, when you say crypto lawyer, like I bet you their heads are spinning. And this should be a nice segue into this book that has become so valuable to me in my practice. What is crypto law?
It's changing really quickly, and actually, it's changed the most that definition in the last 2 months than it has at any point before. Um,
What happened in the
you know,
last 2 months?
it's a bit of a transition, I'd say. Uh, so, like, I guess it's like saying, like, what is? I mean, imagine you're in the '90s, right? And you say, "I'm an internet lawyer," and what does that mean? It means, well, there's this new thing, and we're trying to figure out how existing laws are either going to be created or how you know, existing or how new laws are going to be created or existing laws are going to be applied to companies that utilize the internet. And you're like, oh, that makes sense. That's like a really niche specialty. And then eventually, what ends up happening is like every company, everything that we have becomes internet based, and there's no such thing as internet lawyers anymore. And I think we're kind of like heading that way towards crypto lawyers, where it used to be there are like maybe like 4 or 5 bespoke areas that are specifically relevant to crypto. The biggest of which is either like money transmitter and payments regulations at a state level, or basically how is the SEC viewing digital assets. Um, we seem to be on the precipice of resolving this like federal question, and then over the last several years, there's been, you know, somewhat of consistency building among the states about how to license these types of transactions. And the question of whether these types of transactions are legal is kind of resolved. And it's just like, hey, what are the guardrails around this? And what are the registration processes look like? Um, so what a crypto lawyer is now is somewhat a broad term that's just financial regulation. So financial regulatory lawyers who maybe understand a piece of evolving or pieces of evolving technology pretty well. But I'd imagine that no one's going to be calling themselves a crypto lawyer in 5 or 10 years. It's just you specialize again. You say, I'm a crypto commodities lawyer. I'm a crypto tokenized securities lawyer. I'm a payments lawyer. And that being a payments lawyer itself just necessarily involves crypto.
It
But
sounds
but
like
right
it
now
sounds
we're
like
still in the fair. Yeah.
it sounds like that term social media marketer. Like what is
Yeah.
that? And that was a big thing for the early part of the century. Now I'm wondering, crypto lawyer is going to get fragmented, like you say it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's another thing that's happening in the space, which I find like really interesting, which is the most interesting questions are always on the avant-garde of the technology. So there are like really novel sci-fi sort of questions out there about, how does digital assets like AI integration work, or the things that are happening on DeFi or decentralized organizations, like how are they supposed to be regulated? And that is sort of becoming like its own niche that I would call like serious like crypto law. And that's like sort of like the most fun that you can have as a crypto lawyer. And then the other side of it is how are digital assets integrating into traditional financial systems? And that is really like the crypto side becoming much more like a traditional financial uh, regulator attorney, um, regulation attorney, and that is like a little more stuffy and traditional, right? And that is developing much faster than the DeFi stuff, which is where like all the really interesting questions I find are.
I think I chat with a lot of people about crypto, and there seems to be a massive amount of confusion about some of the terminology. And I heard you in that great answer, you used five of the terms that I think people can't differentiate:
Mm.
crypto, DeFi, blockchain, Web3. You want to give us a rundown on what is the difference between all these things, or are we just talking about the same gobbledygook?
No, I mean most of them at least have like kind of defined sort of parameters. I would say Bitcoin is its own special thing, right? Bitcoin is a specific network and a specific asset, and it has ambitions that are, I think, tied to the global monetary system. Bitcoin uses a blockchain. The blockchain is what you use to um, record different transactions. But the value of Bitcoin is really this like Bitcoin network, which is everyone is participating to validate transactions. Um, Different people after Satoshi have said, okay, there's some interesting architecture within Bitcoin. What can we use this decentralized architecture for um, to do different types of things? So that's where you saw like Ethereum. That's where you saw, there were things like Namecoin for like domain name registrations. There are lots of different applications for blockchain over the years, and some of these are like really high-minded concepts, right? We're gonna, create a decentralized internet. Some of these are really low-minded concepts. We're gonna create a shit coin called Fartcoin, a Fartcoin or something like that, and then we're gonna basically allow people to trade these on like affinity. Um, and everything, all of those, Bitcoin, shitcoins, Ethereum, Solana, everything together is just basically crypto,
It's
right?
crypto.
Um, the integration of decentralization into your everyday internet life is sort of, I think, broadly thought of as Web3, but Web3 is like a really amorphous concept and one that was probably created and still mostly used by internet marketers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, like, what is Web3? Web3 is like whatever you think it is that has some sort of crypto or, integration involved. And then, like, decentralized finance is like a category of, I view it as financial tools that allow you to mimic traditional financial services in a manner which doesn't require an immediate intermediary.
Intermediary, like a bank or Fed.
Yeah, or an exchange, or like a brokerage, or there's like or a casino. Like there are lots and lots of different examples of how you can use DeFi, and the main point is there's not someone standing in the middle saying this transaction or this activity should or should not be allowed. It's basically the program is allowing the activity to occur, and you are interacting directly with the program.
I went to a hotel school way back when, and I was given a presentation recently up there, and I was talking about, kind of blockchain and applications using this technology. And one of the things that, I was kind of looking at the hospitality industry, and one of the things that I kind of found to succinctly define where we're going here is, and what some possible applications for this is where there are multiple middlemen in a transaction. Blockchain and and apps built on it are incredibly valuable because they can eliminate these middlemen, saving money, making greater efficiency. Have you seen some applications in an industry or, a sole company or something of that nature that you think this is the epitome of using blockchain technology in the most effective way?
I guess there's two examples that always like come to mind as to what is the best use for this that is not either trading or asking as a substitute for money or gold. Um, the first is in like an insurance context. I think insurance is like sort of it's a boring topic that no one wants to talk about, but it's actually like probably the most prime for utilizing this type of decentralized service. But basically, it would
But
allow you.
why insurance?
Yeah. So here's why. It's like insurance is basically structured like a product is like an if then statement. If X happens, then Y will occur. And a smart contract, something you can write on Ethereum or Solana or many others, are also like basically if then statements, right? If X happens, then Y is paid out. So you can basically take that model and let's say you have something called a para mutual contract, which is like an
Yeah.
insurance contract that basically says like no matter the quality, if this event happens, it's going to end up paying out, right? So I say, okay, I have a farm. I want to go and place a pari-mutuel contract on that farm that says if frost occurs, then I get X amount of money because it's basically just assuming that the yields crop is done and we're going to, right, like need a payout. So what you do is you create the product, you tie it into some third-party oracle that is trusted, like let's say Noah, and Noah says, okay, under this longitude latitude, if Noah says that frost occurs in this, square, then it automatically triggers a payment to the farmer. So you're replacing a system which is I'm the farmer, I see there's frost, I call up the adjuster, the adjuster comes, looks at the land, files a report. The report is then submitted. It takes 60 to 90 days for a check to be issued. And now 6 months later, I finally get paid out to something where I can buy this contract online. The contract is always looking at this oracle. Once the oracle shows that this condition has occurred, it immediately triggers a USDC payment, let's say like a stablecoin payment directly into the farmer's digital wallet, and all of a sudden they've gotten paid before these crops have defrosted. And that to me is like think about how many people, how many layers of like inefficiencies are solved, and how much cheaper the insurance product actually becomes if you can do that. The
If you
other
can just
thing that I think,
eliminate all those people essentially.
yeah, exactly. The other thing that I think about that I don't think a lot of people really appreciate is like we tend to think about like transactions in Bitcoin or whatever as like, oh, you can send $1 billion to a different country instantaneously without anyone's like supervision. Isn't that amazing? And it's like, that's really cool. But how many people need that? Right. And also like, there are traditional like um, payments networks and banks that if you have $1 billion you want to send overseas, they will do that for basically free, and they will accommodate a pretty quick transaction. What I think, what I think the real value is I'm not able to send you online right now a nickel because it would cost more in payment processor
Yeah.
fees to get you that nickel, or a penny, or a half a penny, or 1/32 of a penny, right? So once you start realizing that with a lot of these like uh, transaction networks and crypto products, you can actually send like micro payments. You start opening up the idea of like what does a financial transaction even mean? You start thinking about it, like how are people paid online? You start thinking about like how are people like paid? You can stream money to people, but now you have all of these AI products that are basically being created and theorized on that need to communicate with each other. And sometimes this is something like a large language model, right? Where two different models are trained separately, but they're utilizing each other's information to create some sort of output. So those models can basically interact with each other. Well, how are they going to like pay each other for the information? They're going to do so using like some sort of cryptocurrency. Or imagine this, you have two autonomous vehicles and they're both trying to make a right turn, and this person has set as their like standards that they want to get there as fast as possible no matter what, and this person says I'm not on like the highest priority. So when this person needs to like make a right turn, they are basically going to stream a small amount of cryptocurrency directly into the wallet of this car, not even the owner of the car, but the car itself will have a wallet that will tell the systems, okay, this person's going to go forward. And all of a sudden you have crypto as like the basically communication layer between autonomous, you know, representatives of humans. And to me, like, I think it's really very possible that putting aside Bitcoin as like a monetary instrument, the rest of crypto generally is like a footnote in the infrastructure of how do we eventually have like a completely um, artificially intelligent integrated world.
That is going to be a movie one day. You know, the way you talk, and I'm going to ask you a question about kind of where we're going in a second here, but the way you talk reminds me of so much of one of my first bosses out of college. This guy who's now the Bitcoin evangelist, Michael Saylor. He would do these town hall meetings when I was working there, and he would, you know, he opines on the future and the kind of the hard to imagine and the sci-fi movie type stuff. And he would talk to us. This is back in the year 2000. And he would talk to us about how one day, you know, you will have an app on you will have a phone, and your phone will tell you that there's traffic on your way to work, and it'll reroute you to another place, and it'll send you alerts if that happens. And at the time, we were trying to build it at MicroStrategy, and it sounds such like a foreign, bizarre concept. And now we kind of take it for granted. And same with a variety of other, you know, areas where they said, oh, don't go to Vail this weekend because I-70 is going to close due to 2 feet of snow. Like, that seems like a foreign concept. So my question to you is, you know, one, how long these things that you're talking about, is this when you and I are like super old and don't remember our names anymore, or is this coming in the next 5 to 10 years?
Um, for the most part, technologically, we're already there, right? And like one of the things I talk about in my book is this idea of like a cyclone of progress, which is like you think about like what does it take for you to hop in an Uber? Well, there's like a like Uber is like a logistics company, right? And that
Yeah.
had to be built.
Yeah.
But we already have logistics companies. But Uber's also like a regulatory company, and they had to like figure out what are the regulations about basically taxis that aren't acting as taxis, private taxi services. But also like Uber is like a harbinger of like a cultural change, which is you are now comfortable getting in the car with someone you don't know.
Yeah.
Um, and that itself, all of that is like built on like the ubiquity of your iPhone and constantly be connected to the internet and everything that goes along with that. So we have all of the pieces for all of these things. It's just, does the culture kept like get up to speed fast enough that we can start to implement them? So for example, like the two examples that I gave, right? You would have to have like large insurance companies or at least startups, right?
Yeah.
Basically recognize that there is like a benefit to having these automatic contracts put in place. And, you know, the industry moves very slowly, and it's not like farmers are demanding it. Like, you know, they're just not like the education level to say like, oh, this is going to be a really good thing. The other aspect of it is like, you know, we already have like these Waymos, we already have these autonomous vehicles, but they're not ubiquitous yet. They're still sort of like novel. So we need like the cars and then the regulations around those driving cars to, you know, get settled before the payment networks between the cars are implemented. But as far as like a technology goes, like we could do that right now pretty easily.
You know, before I want to start talking to you about the legal landscape and what's happened in the last 5 years that have changed it, allowed it to go forward really quickly, or made it stop and kind of like shut down innovation. But before I do that, I want to talk to you about your book and plug it. You know, I wouldn't plug it if I wasn't such a dedicated user of it as a we'll call me a wannabe crypto lawyer striving to be Justin Wales. I come across all manner of issues, and when I have to tackle those issues, I start with your book. So do you want to give us a little brief overview of what is the crypto legal handbook, who should read it, who could it be useful for, and how you had the time and patience to put all of that information into one book.
Yeah, sure. It really started off with we were hiring some folks at the company, and I wanted to give them a like an overview of what I thought that they should know just working at a crypto company and what I thought like was like a base level of knowledge. So I put together basically a list of links to articles or videos or podcasts, what have you, and 100 links or whatever, and like no one was reading, no one was like actually going through them, right? Because it was just like overwhelming and there was no context to any of it. So then that started like getting built out to being like a kind of like an article putting these links into context, and then the article was getting like so long that I was like, well, let me try to categorize this into sections, and before I knew it, these were chapters. And then at some point it was like, what am I doing? Let me actually just like um create either an article or a book that I can send to people, because everyone's asking me like, what do I need to know to break into crypto law, or what are the I'm intimidated by how much information there is out there. So it was really like something that I could point to and say, here, read this, and this should give you everything you need to like either conceptualize like what's happening politically with the crypto climate, or if you're working at a company, like what are your lawyers telling you, or if you want to start breaking into the industry, you're like definitionally, like what do you need to know? And I really tried to write it in a way that was accessible. So you could go in and say, like, I've never heard of Bitcoin, but I want to know about crypto law. I don't know how the government works. I don't know what the SEC or the CFTC is. I don't know how, what the Bank Secrecy Act is. All of these things that I think a lot of folks in the industry assume everyone knows about. But if you're a first year, second year law student, you probably like, I didn't understand when I was in law school, like, why do we have an SEC and a CFTC? It seems crazy to me that we have two separate financial regulators.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the history of how each of them developed, it actually starts to make a lot of sense, and that puts into context why do how the oversight of the agricultural industry is a separate committee than the financial industry in the House and the Senate, right? So it's like those types of things that I thought were really helpful, and also just a way for me to provide like an up to date resource, because the industry moves so quickly that by the time you look at like the actual textbooks that are out there, by the time they come out, they're so out of date. It costs like $200 or $300. It's like just such a scam for most people who are in law school to deal with. So I was like, I think the book's like $30.
Yeah.
I update it every year. The next edition is coming out in like probably like 3 weeks, and it's going to be like the crypto legal handbook under like the Trump administration, and a lot of what is in the current book is went instantly out of date on January 6th of this year.
Let me ask you. I'm going to ask you about politics in a second, but I as you were talking about that and everything that went into that book, have you always been this focused? I feel like you are more focused and are able to dip your hands in so many different projects and things in addition to your career. And for those that are listening, Justin and Ava just welcomed a new baby into the world a few months ago. So you got two young kids. You got a job as basically head of legal for the Americas for a prominent, crypto exchange. How is it that you can write a book, that you can show up and do speaking events, that you can sit with your old friend on a podcast? Like, how is that possible?
I mean, I really just believe that like you just do things, right? And I think a lot of people get really worked up about whether they're allowed to do something or the preparation needed. But I write a lot. Like I write every single day, and most of it is like fiction or sort of like other stuff that I'm working on. But if you just like, if your downtime is like sitting at a computer and just like letting like thoughts flow out of your hand and not, playing Madden, then all the time you're spending getting really good at Madden is just spent like creating a bunch of work. And eventually some of that gets seen by folks and a lot of it doesn't. And I think the other thing is like the only things I'm in is kind of like the question, I asked when we were doing the new leaders council thing, which is, am I going to enjoy this? Right? Like I'm at the point in my life and my career where I don't want to just waste time on things that I feel like I should do. So everything that I do is something that I want to do. And I treat everything in my life as sort of a hobby. And I don't try to make it into like a money making endeavor. And then you find that like the money sort of comes, but you actually enjoy it. So I do like a lot of art and writing, and I have hobbies and friends, and I just try to gravitate towards what I enjoy. And luckily, like one of the things that was nice about the crypto, um, like just my career, is this started out as a hobby,
Yeah.
and I just got really into it. And I have the kind of personality where if I'm into something a little, I'm completely obsessed with it, and it's all I want to think about. And you just gather enough of those topics, then you end up having a lot of output, and it doesn't really feel like you're working or you're so begrudged.
I imagine that some of the younger people listening to this podcast are going to think of you and say, "Gosh, I just want to be like Jay Wales, man. You seem to be living your best life." And I look at you and I see what you do, and I think it's amazing, and I try to live more like you. But on that note, one of the things that listeners may not hear, and hearing that I'm like kind of a crypto-ish lawyer, and you are the oracle of
You're,
crypto
you,
lawyers.
I don't like this self-deprecation. Like you do quite a lot of work in this space, and I think more than you're letting on. But like there's no secret sauce. It's you're doing it, and this is one of the things I tell kids. I talked to this girl from the University of Miami the other day who was a 1 or 2L, and she was like, "Well, what do I need to do to be a crypto lawyer, and what do I need to do to break in the industry?" And I say, you just start doing it, right?
Yeah.
You just start like reading and becoming an expert and like talking to people and writing as much as you can and contributing. And sometimes your contributions are going to be looked at as not, not helpful or misguided. And you just learn and learn and learn. And I really don't think that there's like any secret sauce. Like I make the joke in the book that like being a lawyer or a crypto lawyer is not rocket science, and it's not even computer science. Like these are just, the job of a lawyer, unless you're like really technical and you're doing like really specific types of applications or something like that. For the most part, it's coming across different information sets and trying to make sense of it. And it's something that I think Cubs like you have quite a lot, and you do a lot of work in this space, and I think it's replicable, and there's not really anything so special about what I do.
Maybe it's the present company that's making me feel shy. Well, listen, I don't want people to think this is all lovey and dovey between Justin and I kind of want us to be example for this entire country, because Justin and I fall on different sides of the political spectrum in a lot of different ways. And politics and the changing atmosphere has had a lot to do, or had a lot of impact on crypto. So Justin, and don't mince words, talk to me about where we were in the last 4 years and where you think we're going, and from a standpoint of how politics and building legal frameworks is going to affect crypto.
Yeah, there are a lot of different theories as to how the law develops and is applied. And I think I've always taken, and this comes from like having like started in a constitutional practice. I've always taken this like legal realist theory, which is, what does the Constitution say? It says what five people at the Supreme Court can agree to at any different point, right? So what is constitutional is somewhat based on personality. It's somewhat based on politics. And when you get into areas of real, good faith dispute, um, a lot of it comes down to who the judge is and what is the underlying political ideology of that area, right? So let's look at like the Bank Secrecy Act as an example. The Bank Secrecy Act was immediately challenged to the Supreme Court in, I think, the 1970s. And the Bank Secrecy Act basically says that there are certain types of transactions that, when they are going through the bank, must be reported. And um, the question became, does this violate the Fourth Amendment? Right, just like an automatic requirement that the bank uh, give over information, or there's something called the third party doctrine, which says that if you voluntarily give your information to a bank, that bank is allowed to basically give it over to law enforcement without notifying you. So the question is, okay, is this constitutional? And I think most people, when reading the Fourth Amendment and reading the pre-1970s case law, like analyzing the Fourth Amendment, would say it's not. But the Supreme Court disagreed, and now we have this regime that is basically a warrantless search regime for financial institutions. Um, the Patriot Act is another good example, right? Where I think a lot of people would say, well, the Patriot Act seems to just be a domestic spying program. It clearly could not be constitutional under the Fourth Amendment, but in fact, it is. And why is it? It's because it was challenged, and the Supreme Court said it was. So there's this element of law that you know the legal system is essentially like a policy branch. It's a political branch, and they are a check on Congress and they're a check on the executive, but they themselves have like a policy agenda the higher up you get into the appellate system. So where we've been for the last several years is like the crypto industry has posed many issues of like complete first impression to different regulatory bodies. And those regulatory bodies have, one, for the most part, failed to pass proactive legislation that solves these issues and says, okay, look, Congress says X, and therefore this is how the entire industry or the segment of the industry is going to be regulated. And they've essentially left it up to enforcement by the federal government, and then determination on that enforcement by the judiciary. And that was basically the history of like the Biden administrations, and Gary Gensler's tenure under the SEC.
I thought you'd have dropped a lot more F-bombs by now, but you're doing it so respectfully.
I appreciate it. So once the new administration came in, it was clear that this idea of just let's enforce our way into jurisdiction over this industry and hope that we catch enough courts that the judges will agree and it'll sort of like slide up to the appellate system to give us some real jurisdiction. That has been thrown out the window. And what's happened in the last month or so is that the SEC has basically taken the position of, we're not going to try to just enforce for the sake of enforcement. We're going to support legislation and rulemaking. Congress is going to support rulemaking, and we're not going to try to basically strangle the industry in a morass of regulations that can't actually be complied with. We're going to work with the industry to actually craft something. And I think it's really good for everyone involved, because we want everyone who's in the industry, who's legitimate, wants to just know what the rules are, and we can figure out a way of complying with those rules. It gets really disheartening when you find that your government is trying to create a set of rules or point to an existing set of rules that can't be complied with just because the technology is different and the timing is different, and say, I guess you got to go out of business. And we say, well, that doesn't seem like a viable option. And in fact, it was not how basically any other country in the world except the United States acted. And luckily, it's been a month of not having to deal with that sort of regime again.
I thought this is where we were going to get contentious and we're going to start, throwing some mockery at each other. But I find the way you say that pretty hard to disagree with, and I can't imagine anybody would disagree with us. So I appreciate you doing that. Look, we're going to move into what I call our final thought segment here, Justin. And the way it's framed here is, and here's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get into your head and get it out to our listeners. I think a lot of people want to know, how you think, what's important to you, where you want to spend your time, things like that nature. So if you don't mind, I want to ask you five really kind of quick answer questions. I think on any of these questions, you could spend a lot of time, but we're trying to just get some quick thoughts from you. And then we'll kind of end up with your kind of final thoughts. And I got a question I want to pose to you along that.
Yeah,
So,
sure. I do have a unified theory of like how my brain works. If I'll get to, I'll tell you that at
I
the
think
end.
that's
But
going to be the next book,
oh yeah, maybe.
and it's going to be a New York Times bestseller. So here are the five questions. Biggest regret in life.
When I was in law school, it was my first year, and I was living in Miami. My family's in LA, and I decided to stay back in Miami to study during Thanksgiving break.
I
And
love that.
that was like, it was not like it was, oh, it was the last time I saw my grandmother.
Yeah.
I missed it wasn't anything. It was just like a casual Thanksgiving where like I could have been back with my family. And I remember like always thinking like this was stupid. Like I shouldn't have made that decision.
All right, great. Next one. If you had one genie wish, what would it be?
I'm very like aware that right now I am living um a part of my life that I'm gonna miss when I'm older, like having young kids and everyone being healthy and having like my parents around and everything like that. So I think it would just be like to continue to appreciate what I have right now. Because I mean, honestly, I can't ask for anything else.
Next one. If you could do it all over again, would you become a lawyer?
Yeah. I mean, it's maybe not for everyone, right? But like the world that I grew up in, which was like extreme poverty and just like no real chance of like upward mobility. Like law school is like a complete super like it's like a cheat code where if you're able to just basically read pretty well and speak a bit well and kind of present yourself, you can go from like utterly like destitution to a really good life. Like I got lucky with like the crypto stuff and all that stuff, but even if I was just doing like insurance defense work at like a kind of small shop in Miami, I'd be paying the bills.
Next one. What professional position do you aspire to?
I have no aspirations. I mean I'm if you're kind of into what I'm into, the job I currently have is the one that you want, right? Which is like thinking about like the legal issues of like a very large crypto company. And luckily, like we do like so much that it involves kind of traditional financial work. It involves really science fiction, sort of like DeFi stuff. So it's what I have. It's what I have now. I'm like the assistant uh, baseball coach on my son's little league team. So like maybe one day I'll become the head coach.
Get to the Dodgers level, or is that not? No.
No, no, this
Little
is
league head coach.
Encino Little League coach. Yeah.
And then the final one. What's your favorite moment each day?
I mean bedtime, right? Like being able to read like stories to your kids in bed and be with my wife and just have this like little moment of us as a family.
Well, that is awesome. Listen, I want to, before I let you go, and we're going to do a final segment here where I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we ended up here. But before we go, I know that you dedicate a lot of time to helping young lawyers, young crypto types, help them make decisions about their career. What is the one piece of advice you have for a young aspiring lawyer?
I think, well, I mean, I guess I'll give you a couple because I don't know which is like the one, but I'll give you like the few that I always tell people is that one is that you should have like a healthy disrespect for people who are giving you advice and to tell you what you should do with your life. I think like most people give advice that tries to reinforce what they've already done with their own life. But like there are lots of like odd pathways, and not everyone needs to go through the same, sort of like pedigree in order to be happy. So I would say like that's one is just like you got to figure out like what's really good for you. I would say that you should never Never take a job that requires you to be a different person at work than you are at home. Like you should try to have like a unified self. And that the third is that, our our world that we're experiencing today is very different than the world was 25 years ago or 50 years ago or 75 years ago. So this idea that you should do something just because that's the way it's always been done actually historically has proven wrong, and that you should try to view questions and positions, even ones that seem to be completely, settled, with a new view. And you should really try to think about whether what you're being told is true is actually true. And that's how you come up with like really um, counterintuitive solutions to really hard problems.
Well, that's awesome. Listen, I want to thank you for coming on, taking time. We all know how busy you are and how much you value your time. I hope that, I've made good use of your time, because we know, how hard it is to get. But before you go, I wanted to kind of do a final thought here on the podcast. This is going to become a segment just to kind of tell people why we did the podcast. This podcast is a lot about trying to talk to, for me, it's people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who are making some big decisions in their life about family, about their profession, and kind of all the challenges that come along the way. I found myself, probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I think Justin heard this all the time. I just was bored with life. I was bored with the law. I was bored with money. I was bored with, I couldn't find a way to make myself smile each day. And then along comes Justin, and he's kind of coaxes me in to start thinking about crypto law. And that's just a professional thing and shouldn't have a super significant role in my life. But what it did is it made me start learning again, made me go back to the beginning, read. I was like a student again, and it felt great. And I saw the impact that had on my entire existence, with my friends, with my family, with my partner, with my dogs. And it also made me more ambitious. I love wine. I make wine. I drink wine and I taste it. And I had kind of left that aside. And all of a sudden, this spurt of new learning got me back into everything I do. So if there was a piece of advice I could give, young people, 30s, 40s, 50s, trying to figure out how to find joy in life, it's constantly change yourself, constantly learn new things. And I think Justin Wales is the embodiment of that. And he certainly taught me that lesson. So I really want to thank you for that. Thank you for coming on the pod. This is episode 1. It could not have been with anybody but Justin Wales. And so please subscribe. We look forward to the next couple weeks and a lot of fun things coming. Appreciate it.